welcome to this episode of Better Life. I am so excited to have my guest today, who you might recognize. His name is Kip Bradford, and he's the pastor of the Gateway Seventh-day Adventist Church here in town, and also the Sunrise Church in Central Point.
Yes.
But that's not where you've always been. And I've heard that pastors don't automatically go straight to a church, that there's a development process.
Yes. Well, my journey to become a pastor is different than most in many ways. And so, to find myself as a pastor of two churches in the Oregon Conference is nothing short of a miracle.
So let's go way back, and I'd really like to hear where this story started.
Well, the journey to ministry, and so this is probably a conversation for which all of us need to think about, because we're all ministers, right? It's not just pastors are pastors, but that means, you're an elder at the Gateway Church, you're a minister, members are ministers. We are all tasked with the journey of sharing Jesus into our community, our families, our friends, and whatever.
That's right.
All right, because if we're being transformed to have the image of God, giving that image back that we lost in the Garden of Eden, we are being transformed to be Christ-like, then our engagement of life is just organically, we are sharing Jesus because we are becoming a reflection of Him. So we'll go all the way back to your question. Before I came to ministry, I had never left the church, but I think that the Seventh-day Adventist, I grew up in the church as a pastor's son.
Okay.
And it used to be that Adventist kids, when they just stop participating, don't qualify themselves as non-Adventists. They just stop participating. And, we kind of drifted back in the 20s and 30s and eventually moved into McKinleyville, California, and started going to church because the in-laws were engaged there, and we are always respectful to our parents, right? That's one of the commandments. Yep. And so we're going through the motions, and then get re-engaged in a form of faith. And at the time, I had done many different jobs. I ended up in the music industry, owning a music store and doing sound system stuff and becoming quite independent, and making pretty good money. And in that narrative, we find that as we become self-sufficient, and I'm sure that viewers can relate to this, as we become self-sufficient, we also so oftentimes become less dependent on Christ in our walk in faith. So one day, when the economy turns and things are not looking good, Denise came to me and she said, we haven't been faithful with our tithes and offerings. I mean, we were always giving, but not specifically purposeful, systematic, right? And we were probably 3 months from bankrupt. And because we were living large, and then when the economy turned, we couldn't keep up with the largeness of life. And we turned back toward God and sold our business and sold our home, which were miracles in themselves. And we came to this community, Grants Pass.
So in the interim, and when you're living large and everything, you were attending church, but you were just kind of going through the motions still at that phase.
Right, and I'm nobody's judge, but I would say that my gut tells me that a large segment of church-going people are going through motions, and that's not, making a list like you. I'm just saying, in fact, Ellen White said at one time in her ministry that only 20% of the members were going to be saved. So if you have 20% of 100 people stand up, how many people are standing up?
Yeah, it makes me think of the story of the 10 virgins. They all believe the same thing. They're all ready for the same thing. They're all waiting, but Christ only knew half of them.
Exactly.
That's a terrifying thought to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, this coming Sabbath, I'm going to be talking about, are you ready? So clearly, we weren't ready. And we moved here after God intervened and sold our overpriced home. It was a custom 2-bedroom home, 2,700 square foot log home. It was made for us by us. And the realtor said, well, custom homes don't sell really good because they're made for you,
Very
not for
specific,
everybody,
right.
And so that sold. We were actually heading for Tennessee, and God had a different plan.
That's quite a detour. So where was this
Well,
home?
I just have a really bad map, or I'm a very bad map reader. I'm dyslexic, so. But it was November the 9th, Denise's birthday, and her folks came out as we were in the process of selling everything and said, look on the West Coast. And we have horses, so we were going to go where you can buy a lot for little, because we
Right.
weren't going to have much left over. If we'd have made the decision to sell a few years before, we would have been fine, but God had a plan.
Yep.
And we found a home here that would meet our needs, that was in the right price range, so we moved here. I couldn't find a job. Denise got a job instantly. I could not find a job. I've been self-employed most of my life, so nobody wants to interview a guy like me because I'm independent. Finally got an interview for a job that didn't pay very well, and it was kind of a dumb job, but it was God's plan. Because I worked by myself. I was the head of my department working by myself.
Okay.
Liquidating product,
Okay.
right? Because I came from retail, music retail. And I was liquidating product, and during that year that I worked for them, I would wear headphones and I'd listen to books, good books, listen to my Bible. I was just having this spiritual awakening that started in McKinleyville and it continued here. And I call that my time in the wilderness.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that sure sounds like a wilderness story.
Yeah, it was my time in the wilderness. And when we moved here, to step back a little bit, I had dropped off a resume at Better Life Broadcasting.
Okay.
Because I can do a little bit of electronic work. It's not educated, it's trial and error. But, I've in the music industry, I had to fix things sometimes.
Right. Which I find
and
to
so
be
I
a pretty
learned
good
ways
fit here.
around the education, which if you know me, you figure that Kip has to find ways around it because I don't do the path of learning well. I have to find my own path.
Yeah.
So I dropped off a resume. They had nothing. I went to my time in the wilderness, and one day I'm sitting at my desk, liquidating my stuff, and I just felt this strong impulse to call Better Life or to email. I think I emailed Ron Davis, who was the general manager at the time, and say, "Do you remember me? Do you happen to have a job opening?" That was it.
Just out of the blue.
A strong impulse out of the blue, I mean, I was relatively happy doing what I was doing there in the sense that it was a very low pressure job, but it was also kind of a dumb job. And he emailed back, "Yeah, I remember you. No, we have nothing." Pretty much was what it said. Very kindly said that.
Right.
And about 2 weeks later, I got a phone call and said, "Well, as a matter of fact, we do have something." And I was interviewed with, I think, 15 or 20 other candidates for the position as the assistant to the general manager. And I got the job. So from that moment, I accepted the job. I came and I worked here for, I don't know how many years, 3 or 4 years. And when Ron retired from here, they moved me to be the executive director. Speaker director, they called me. I had 7 titles while I was here, so they didn't know what to do with me. During that time, I felt this connection and I fell in love with ministry in itself. Even though God didn't have a plan to leave me here. I think I was here 8 years or so. And part of that call was a feeling that God wanted me to be in a ministry that was a little more relational, which would be pastoral ministry.
Right.
And the problem was, and is, that I never finished my college degree. I'm working on it, or I have been working on it. I haven't lately, because pastoring's a very busy job.
I've heard that it can be.
Yeah. So it was interesting. I had just mentioned, I said, I kind of feel that God's calling me to pastoral ministry. And I mentioned it to somebody who was working here at the time, who was a pastor's wife. And she said, well, I can see that. And she called a gentleman here, a retired pastor here in, no, he did. She talked to another pastor I had been around, but I had not gotten to know. And his response was, well, it seems like it's about time. And which I didn't have a relationship. We'd just been around each other,
Okay.
which was a little confirmation. And then he called a friend of his who was in ministry and told him about me, retired pastor, who went to the Oregon conference and went to every office and said, you need to talk to this individual, which didn't happen. I mean, he went and talked, but I didn't get to talk to.
Right.
And so I put together a resume, but every time that I would have a conversation with a pastor or a retired pastor seeking counsel, every one of them affirmed that they could see a call in my life.
Right. But it wasn't happening.
It wasn't happening.
So I'm curious. One of my favorite things about how God works is He uses these experiences we have in our lives to prepare us. So looking back, what did the wilderness experience? What did the financial trials? How did those prepare you for
Yes,
this time?
The financial trials, so we're going to go way back and then forward again. The financial trials was we were probably close to $1 million in debt and nearly bankrupt. I mean, I actually calculated out if we don't have a solution by this time, I'm going to have to go see that guy.
Right.
Right? And God fulfilled it because we had turned back toward Him and He'd taken care of it. Within 3 years of that time, we not only found ourselves financially, yes, making less money, but financially comfortable, but completely debt-free.
That's a God
Our
thing.
house was paid for, our cars were paid for, and we've maintained that not because we are wealthy, but because God is faithful. And has taught us the wisdom of responsibility in our, and so we're happier than we've ever been, and we're living in, yes, a smaller house, but
So somewhere in there, God taught you the lesson about stuff.
about stewardship, about stuff, what's important, and all of that. The coming to better life, or that time in the wilderness, was just teaching me more about His will for my life and leading me into a greater, so He established a stronger faith in relying on Him, and then through the wilderness experience began to establish the desire to serve Him. So those two linked together, and then better life, and I fell in love with ministry, but I wanted a more relational ministry.
Right.
I just felt, because I'm a talkative guy that wants to be
You
with
are,
people.
yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So that's my superpower. Unless you're on the receiving end of my talking, then it's like, go away. But
Right. Well, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to learn more about that transition you made into I'm going to spoiler it, into full-time ministry. So we're talking with Pastor Kip Bradford, and he's just sharing his testimony of how God molded him and formed him into what he's doing now, the journey we're all on. We'll be back right after this.
Better Life Broadcasting is a viewer-supported Christian media ministry that offers streaming programming via apps on various devices. Please visit blbn.org to support Better Life or to get more information. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Welcome back. I'm enjoying my conversation with Kip Bradford, Pastor Kip Bradford, and you're sharing with us how life prepares us, each of us, for the role God will have us in. And we never know. Tomorrow He may call you to do something different, right? But He had a very specific call for you, but it wasn't something that happened instantaneously.
no, part of that process taught me to rely on God's timing. Because as I was explaining, I was going through a process of receiving counsel from others who had responded to the call to pastoral ministry. And that was all affirmation. It was like,
Right.
Yeah, we
And
see you in
that's
that role.
huge, right? Having those voices, the voices we choose to listen to. There's a lot of them out there, and you found these mentors or these people who had a vision of what God had in store.
Right. And we went up, Denise and I actually drove up to Portland and met with the one gentleman that I had never met, that was based on what the other pastor had said, was going to the conference and saying, you need to talk to this guy. He doesn't have a degree, but you need to talk to this guy, which never happened. Well, it happened eventually, but it wasn't because of his prompting. And so I wrote my resumes and all of the verbiage that tried to express the call. And it's a very humbling thing to, you know, to be called and to respond to the call and recognize that you desire this. You have to wrestle with, am I desiring something out of my own will, or am I responding to God's desire for me and saying, yeah, I'll do that.
Right.
Right.
Sometimes you expect it, well, if this is what God wants, he's going to grease the wheels and we're just going to slip right in.
Yeah.
But it almost sounds like, you know, a lot of job descriptions, I picture, you know, maybe it's a square or a circle and it just doesn't fit quite right.
Yeah. And
but God could work through that.
Exactly. And sometimes you hear people that will express their responding to God's call in whatever way that looks, and out of a desire to be humble in that, because we're supposed to be humble, is that almost a dialogue that says, I reluctantly, or I don't want to, but I'll do it for you, God.
Yeah.
That's really not fair. If you're called, I mean, it might be fair in other people, in somebody's life, but if you're called to it, then we should embrace it with joy, not with reluctance. What did Jeremiah said? Go send me. And so, as I responded to that, and I filled out my resume and my cover letter and my references, I had lots of references. I had a reference from a conference president, or used to be conference president, but not here. And I sent my resume to the Oregon conference and had a discussion, which basically was, you know, if it's God's will, but you don't measure up on paper. Right. So I was like, okay, I get that. You know, if it's God's will, it'll happen. If it's not, it won't. And I sent my resume to Idaho and to Montana, which Denise wasn't too keen on either one of those places. So Idaho's nice, but Montana's cold. They're both cold. But
boy, I picture Montana, I picture horses. So
right, and so we actually went up and preached at a church and met some people, and come to find out, I got to know the conference president, and he said that they very seriously considered me. But some of the smaller conferences are more open to alternative paths to pastoral ministry. But the Oregon conference had been resistant, you know, and that's not a criticism, that's an understanding. It's a large conference that they don't usually have problems finding people who have gone to seminary and done all those things, that would like to come
normal trajectory
to this beautiful conference with 146 something like that churches. It's not a small conference. It's a large conference, and so the shoe doesn't fit, if you would say. But God doesn't care about the shoes that fit, right? And eventually, now we're going to have to shift just a little bit. Eventually, as I was seeking God's will in this, I also was trying to run Better Life, and so I'm sitting in your shoes, worrying about money. Which is easy to, have you learned that? It's easy to worry about those things.
It can keep you up at night. That's an area of my life God is really still working on.
Right. So I did something I had never done before, and I decided I was going to take a fasting day. And you know, I'm the high energy kind of guy, and so to stop and listen, which Scripture says to do, is really hard for me. I'm always running ahead of myself. Attention deficit, dyslexic, and somewhat energy driven. Right? I don't think I'm a type A, but I just go do things.
Right.
And so I decide I'm going to do that. So I go out to Lake Selmac, and I take my chair, and I take my big jug of water, and I take my Bible, and take a pad, because for me to have a season of prayer, I have to journal, because my mind goes every direction. Right. You know, this interview shows my mind goes over. So I have to journal to stay focused. when I'm doing a season of deep prayer. And so I had my worries about better life, about financial, and Denise keeps a faith folder.
Yes, she sure does.
And when I'd get worried,
Yeah.
and I know she does this with you, she brings in the faith folder, which shows God's financial blessings that come unexpectedly when human wisdom says we're in trouble.
Right.
Right? God says you're never in trouble. You just have to have faith in me.
Yeah.
Rely on me. Do what you can. I'll take care of the rest. And what's beautiful about the way that God works is He never works in excess. He gives you what you need when you need it, not before, not after, and not in typically in surplus. You see that in Christ's life in His ministry, the miracles that He did. He only did the miracles when human agents with Him working through them couldn't deal with it. And so feeding the 5,000, couldn't buy enough food for them.
Right.
But He didn't give much more than was needed, and that was symbolic. So we see Christ in His miracles. He calmed the sea, but He didn't calm it forever, right? He calmed it for what was needed right now. And so we have to recognize that when we're seeking God, that God supplies what's needed, not excess.
Right.
And
I appreciate that thought, because that's not just at the global level, that's at the individual.
Right.
You talk about how, I find it kind of interesting what you were saying about how other people were telling you that, well, basically, thank you for your resume, you don't really quite fit, and whatever else. We do that to ourselves at times. I mean, how often, what do they call it? They call it, there's a phrase for it where we view ourselves as not sufficient. And so we go into something just feeling like, well, I can't do that. Imposter syndrome.
not qualified, right?
Yeah.
Imposter syndrome?
Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
And God gives you what you need at the individual level as well. I remember a line in one of my favorite shows recently, The Chosen, where He says, it's okay. He saw in you everything you need, and when you need more, He'll supply it.
Right.
And I love that.
And God will
whether
do
it's
that.
ministry or at the personal level.
So I'm at Lake Selmac. I'm with my chair, my Bible, my gallon of water, and my journal. And I had two prayers. I had two facets to my fasting. One was I was worried about the Better Life money. And you can experience that, right? You
I do
understand
experience
those
that,
feelings.
yes.
And as I left my prayer time that evening, I left with a sense of calm when it came to Better Life Finance. It was essentially God said to me, don't worry about it. Do the thing I've called you to do to the best of your ability. I'll fill in the holes and the gaps and take care of that. The other part of that prayer time was, Lord, you seem to be calling me to pastoral ministry, to someplace else. And in some respect, I felt like I was starting to check out of Better Life, doing what I could, but my mind was somewhere else, my heart was somewhere else, right near the end. And I got a call from the ministerial director, and I said, so I know, Lord, that it is a real call when I get a call from the Oregon Conference, who had been the most resistant just because of education. They had every one of them said, we see the calling, we see the gifts, we just need you to do these things.
You don't fit the criteria quite yet. Yep.
Dot the I and cross the T,
Yeah.
right? So I said, well, before I finish the degree, the Oregon Conference calls me, I'll know that's you speaking. And within a month or two, I got a call from the ministerial director, said, how soon can you leave? They put me on a list, which I didn't get. And a few more months went by. And during that time, I just was at calm with it, and realized that it's God's timing, not my timing. Even though the desire of my heart hadn't been fulfilled yet, it was God's timing, not my timing.
Right.
In hindsight, when I finally got a call to the district that I'm in now, rather than waiting a long time for it, it happened in the Oregon Conference within 3 days when God said, okay, it's time.
When it was His time.
When it was His time. And I can't imagine doing anything else at this point in ministry. It's relational. It is just a joy to work with the churches. And and just to follow God wherever He leads.
Right. So all this time, I love your story, Kip, and I'm looking forward to hearing how God has continued to lead you. But it resonates, and I think it resonates with all of us that when we are in God's will, there's a peace that comes along with that. It doesn't mean that there won't be stresses. It doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect, but we know through our past experiences that God's got this, and we just need to stick to Him.
Well, I think we a lot of times just hover around God's will because we're afraid to step into it. And yet, back to what I mentioned before, when Christ calmed the storm, they were right in the middle of the storm. We need to step into His will. That's where it's going to be calm, but we doubt.
Yeah,
So we stay on the fringes instead of step right into the middle.
I like that. So we have our marching orders. You know, we can dabble in God's will, or we can be right in the middle of it, and it can be quite a ride. But personally, there's no place I would rather be. So as you continue your day, just keep that in mind. Look for God's will in your life and stick to it. Stick to Him, and He will lead you through. Have a wonderful day.